Hello and welcome to the Tea with Che and Shai. I am joined by Chaitanya Kamanduri, political analyst and erstwhile cinema reviewer, and I, of course, am Shai Porn, D-list YouTuber. You just finished your segment on The Beat with Ari Melber, and also the following hour, Joy Reid's hour normally.
Right, yes.
Discussing the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Bipartisan.
Is that actually an Einstein quote? It doesn't. I feel like
no, it's not. It's actually, I looked it up. It's actually originated in a 1983 book by Rita Mae Brown, the mystery novelist.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that misattributed to Einstein so much on the internet? That's interesting. That it's because even when I heard it, it didn't sound like something Einstein would have said.
Probably some sort of horrible misogyny.
Probably,
probably something along those lines.
We have to find like some smart white person to say that.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. But yes, you were discussing the failure of bipartisanship, or the lie of bipartisanship on the part of Republicans.
Yeah, and I think that we have to really talk. I think it's worthwhile to do a sort of a deep dive into 2009.
Sure.
Everything that happened in 2009 really informs everything that Democrats and liberals and progressives are feeling about this year. The first, most important thing to keep in mind is that in 2009, I mean, Barack Obama was 80+ popularity after winning the election. He won with 53% of the vote. And by inauguration time, he was at 80+%. The only president on inauguration day who was more popular than him, interestingly enough, was Jimmy Carter in 1976. So Obama was enjoying historic levels of popularity. Yet, even with that, he couldn't get very much in the way of bipartisan agreement from Republicans on the Stimulus Act. This was an $800 million, $1 billion piece of legislation. After the Great Recession, the stock market crash, and unemployment was going through the roof. And to get concessions from Republicans, he made a quarter of that tax cuts. Tax cuts that he and Austin Goolsbee, his economic advisor, and others admitted that they really didn't want and they regretted. But they did it because they wanted to get Republican votes on this piece of legislation. Obama had campaigned on unity. He wanted to bring people together after the divisiveness of the Bush years. And so he was rewarded by getting exactly 2 Republicans, the Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe. That was it. No other Republicans voted for it. I think you can technically call Arlen Specter a Republican who voted for it, but he did switch parties a few weeks later after. But it's really only Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe were the only 2 Republicans who voted for that, even with giving Republicans a quarter of the stimulus package, and then also bringing it down quite a bit in terms of how much was going to be spent on job programs.
Mm-hmm.
So that starts there, and it's really bad. And then we have the Affordable Care Act, and that's even worse. What happens with the Affordable Care Act is, Rahm Emanuel and others were like, we should just jam this thing through. We have the rights to do it. We can just jam this through. He was saying we can do it anytime between April, May, June, July, etc., just to get this thing through. And Obama didn't want to do that. He basically said that he wanted to be bipartisan. And the person who was encouraging him not to do that in a very big way was Max Baucus, the senator from Montana. He was chair of the Senate Finance Committee. He was urging Obama not to jam this through, said, I can bring you Republican votes on this.
And he also very much wanted to work with the insurance companies at the time. I recall there was a lot of talk towards that.
Well, that was part of the concession. So Chuck Grassley, who was the ranking Republican on the Finance Committee, would there's actually a great piece of videotape I think on YouTube where Obama has a healthcare summit in 2009, and Grassley is a featured speaker, and gets up there and says, we have to respect private healthcare insurers and private healthcare insurance, and we have to do that. And Obama agreed to listen to him and would accommodate that as well.
Right.
So Grassley was saying that I'll work with Baucus on a bipartisan healthcare bill. And this was something that the President Obama really wanted. President Obama really wanted bipartisanship. He took very seriously the idea that the country had been very divided by the Iraq War and George W. Bush needed to come together. And he really believed, campaigned on unity. He really wanted to reach over to the other side on it. So Chuck Grassley basically, just kept going and going with negotiations. You would have lunch regularly at the White House. You would have lunch regularly with Max Baucus. Max Baucus would tell the White House, "I'm still talking to Grassley. We can make something happen."
Right.
Months pass. The economy keeps going badly. As a result, Obama's popularity keeps going down. And as a result, virtually every piece of legislation that Obama wants to get passed becomes more and more unpopular, chief among them the Affordable Care Act.
Right, right. And you talked about this on the show. It was just killing the clock, as it were.
Right. I mean, it's basically the theft of time. The most important concession you can give in politics is time. And the biggest ally that is on Biden's side is his popularity. I mean, the guy is very, very popular with the country. That's not going to last forever. But right now, if he maintains this level of popularity, he can get all kinds of things passed with minimal political repercussions.
Right.
And so that is really what was Chuck Grassley's aim was. Chuck Grassley's aim was to run out the clock on Obama, wait for him to get less popular, and then he didn't have to do anything. And it was a very successful maneuver. He basically completely succeeded in doing it. And he basically was able to say, well, I'm not interested in this. He actually does a Face the Nation, which is really terrible to watch, where he says, Obama would rather talk to dictators than Republicans.
Right.
Which, by the way, Donald Trump very clearly would rather talk to dictators than
Right.
Republicans. I don't think that's something.
Talk with them, have dinner with them.
Yes, I don't think that's
exchange phone calls.
Yeah, I don't think that's something Chuck Grassley's ever objected to when Trump was admitting that. I don't think it was ever true of Obama. And then, so as a result, they end up getting up the Affordable Care Act after a year, after making all these concessions. They finally get it, but it's entirely on a partisan Democratic line of vote. Nancy Pelosi does a Herculean effort in the House to get that thing passed. And then we have a 60-vote majority in the Senate, and we have to make all kinds of concessions. We have to give Joe Lieberman, get rid of the public option, because Joe
Right,
Lieberman
right. Now, was Rahm Emanuel at the time a proponent of the public option? Was that?
Yeah, so so the original plan included a public option in the spring of 2009. And it was always believed that there would be a public option as part of this. What happened was that Joe Lieberman just decided to kill it. And it became a situation where, because they had lost all this Republican support, any single Democratic senator had essentially veto power over it. So you had, the Cornhusker kickback, with Ben Nelson very famously, where he was asking for all this money for his state that he was given in exchange for his vote on the ACA. Joe Lieberman's price was to get rid of the public option. And
well, because Lieberman is from Connecticut, correct?
Right, where all the insurance companies are located. So that's exactly what he was thinking. Now, to be honest with you, Connecticut is such a Democratic state. Lieberman could easily have defied them on this, and he would have been fine. His colleague in crime, Chris Dodd, voted for the public option. I think, speaking out of turn here, I think a lot of this was Lieberman was angry about what had happened to him in the Democratic Party. When he ran for president in 2004, he did very poorly, even though he was the Democratic vice president 4 years earlier. He was very hurt by it. He was a strident proponent of the Iraq War, which caused Ned Lamont to defeat him in a Democratic primary. And then afterwards, several other Democrats like John Kerry, people forget this, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and others, went to Connecticut and campaigned for Ned Lamont and supported Ned Lamont. And so that was something that occurred. So he was very upset about that. Then he defected in '08 and supported McCain over Obama
Right.
in 2008. Sat on the plane with McCain and went all over the country with him. And then in '09, he also got another pound of flesh, which was getting the public option. So I think those were all elements of Joe Lieberman's related to his thinking on that.
Yeah, amazing because he's such a charismatic individual.
Right. An interesting thing about Joe Lieberman, people forget that he actually ran against a very liberal Republican. I mentioned him on the beat before, Lowell Weicker. Lowell
Mhm.
Weicker was a very liberal Republican. He was somebody that the late Larry Kramer, the guy who wrote The Normal Heart, I don't know if people are familiar with the movie or the
The
play.
play, right?
Yeah, Lowell Weicker was somebody that Larry Kramer was actually agitating Bill Clinton to hire as aid czar for the country.
Hmm.
And so that was, that's how liberal Republican Lowell Weicker was. And he so annoyed Republicans with his liberalism that in 1990, William F. Buckley, actually endorsed Lieberman over Lowell Weicker because he pointed out that Lieberman was actually more liberal, more conservative than Weicker was.
Hmm.
And so that's exactly what happened. It's a very interesting sort of race and origin story for Joe
Yeah.
Lieberman. So yes,
So,
but
do you want to, just for our listener,
you're right.
um, could you talk a little bit about why the filibuster is still effective? Like, we had a 19, is it was a 19 vote majority on this commission, this bipartisan commission? Is
Yeah,
that correct?
right. Yeah.
Why is it just the threat of the filibuster, or is there some sort of shortcut mechanism that allows the filibuster to stop that sort of vote from going through?
Yeah, so let's do a little film history. There's a very famous movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where
Right.
you see an actual filibuster. You see Jimmy Stewart actually filibustering a piece of legislation. Um, Now, that is not the filibuster that is used now. When you think of the filibuster, you think of Jimmy Stewart in that movie filibustering a piece of legislation. If you remember, what that required was the person to keep talking. Like they had to talk and talk and talk and talk,
Right.
and they could talk as long as they want.
Right.
That was Senate
And this
rules.
still happens at the local level. It happened down in Texas several
Right,
years back.
right, and it's now called the talking filibuster. But
Mhm.
back in the day, the Senate rules were that a senator could, once he got the floor, he did not have to yield the floor until he stopped talking. And as long as he kept talking, he could keep going for as long as he wanted.
Right.
It was an interesting rule.
Right. You used to be able to just read the phone book, and
Right.
then they changed it
I
to
believe
having to
in
be
that
on
movie,
time.
Stewart reads the phone book in that movie.
Right.
Yeah, but that's exactly what it was. Um, so and there's actually now that's not the case with the filibuster. What happens with the filibuster now is that any Republican can literally email Mitch McConnell that he wants to filibuster the piece of legislation. Mitch McConnell can just inform the Senate parliamentarian, and then there's a filibuster. There's no work involved in
Right.
it. There's absolutely no work involved with it. Now, Manchin and actually Biden have both said they are interested in the idea of going back to the old filibuster, where you
Right.
literally had to talk nonstop. There's a belief that if you did that, it would kill the filibuster because it's very hard to keep talking nonstop, and eventually you're going to run out of steam, right?
Right.
Eventually, you're just going to run out of steam. Now, the most infamous use of the talking filibuster was on various pieces of civil rights legislation throughout history. I mean, the filibuster was primarily used to stop civil rights legislation.
Right. But at
Um,
least then you were able to put a face to the people holding up
right,
progress. You could put a face to the racism of the filibuster at
right,
that
yeah,
time.
exactly right. That would it would allow Chuck Jones to create Foghorn Leghorn based on the machinations of Strom Thurmond and others.
Right.
But that was precisely what you used to be able to do. So the civil rights, the reason that they were effective using the filibuster in civil rights is you have a lot of Southern senators. One would keep talking, and then when they got tired, they could yield to another senator who kept talking. Right,
Right.
that's the way it worked. I do think that if they brought back the talking filibuster, it would not help things very much. I think there's a possibility it actually could make things worse. that all kinds of like procedural bills, budget bills wouldn't even get passed because I can really imagine someone like Ted Cruz loving the talking filibuster. Like he would just sit there
Sure.
and talk off of it. He would raise money off of it. Social media would go wild about it. And then when he got really tired, he could pass the baton to say a Josh Hawley to keep up the act. So I actually just think that the talking filibuster is an idea. Bringing that back, I just think that Manchin and Biden and Biden has admitted that one of his favorite movies is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So I think that is definitely like a piece of thinking in their part that is not correct.
So is
I,
the solution to uh, eliminate it or to lower the threshold for defeating the filibuster?
yeah, I think that so lowering the threshold could be very positive. I also am very open to the idea of challenge flags that you have in the NFL. There are a lot of liberals and progressives who, for example, really believe that we should just get rid of the filibuster. I'm actually very open to that. I think I would much rather simply getting rid of the filibuster than having the current
Mhm.
system. But the one area that I would caution that I think is sort of important to remember was when Bush won re-election in 2004. The first thing he did out of the gate was he tried to privatize Social Security. That
Yeah,
would have been a complete catastrophe, by the way. Can you imagine if people had their Social Security and stock market, and then the 2008 stock market collapse happens? I mean,
exactly.
you would have had rioting in the streets, you would have had violence, you would have had mass panic because people would have
Right.
seen their retirements just go
Right.
down the drain with the stock market. It would have added a tremendous level of anxiety and concern to that horrible event.
Right. You would have seen a massive ill-advised sell-off, and people would not have benefited from the Obama recovery at all. It would have been a complete mess.
It would have
Um,
been a complete mess. But Bush, the only thing that kept Bush from privatizing Social Security, people forget, was Harry Reid filibustered it. He was able to filibuster it. Now, a lot of liberals and progressives point out, look, Social Security privatization was never popular. Nobody liked it. The minute
mhm.
Bush mentioned it, it just it went from being unpopular to more unpopular.
Right.
Karl Rove organized 300 events that George W. Bush did around the country on Social Security privatization. It went nowhere. It went nowhere. But the reason it went nowhere, I would argue, was while he was doing this, Iraq was imploding. I mean, it was absolutely, the Iraq War was at its height. And he
Right.
was reelected because people were like, okay, we're going to stay the course with you on the Iraq War. He did not run on Social Security privatization. If he had, he probably would have lost.
Had
Uh,
he was this effort to privatize Social Security after both 9/11 and then the subsequent invasion of Iraq?
Yeah, it happened in 2005. So it happened.
Hmm.
It happened not only after 9/11 and the Iraq invasion. It happened after the 2004 election.
Election. So he was taking that as a mandate to go and try to
Yeah,
privatize more of the
and in
government.
fact, he actually said it in his first speech after winning re-election. He said, "I have earned political capital in this election, and I plan to spend it."
Right. I
And
recall
I
that.
just, yeah, and I remember, James Carville pointing out after he goes, no, he earned political capital from 9/11 and he spent it all in Iraq. That's actually what happened.
Yeah.
And he misunderstood that. Him and Carville misunderstood that. But they basically did this. Now, the argument is, well, this was a doomed failure, would never have happened. I'm not so sure. I do remember after he won re-election, George W. Bush really, like, Democrats were on the floor at that point. It actually was difficult for Harry Reid to corral all the Democratic senators and make them sign on to the idea that they were not going to break his filibuster on this. It was very hard for him to do this. There was tremendous pressure from George W. Bush. I remember there were books about how America was permanently conservative.
Hmm.
This is the new conservative majority. This is the new Rome, etc. Like it was kind of that sort of idea. I do think if there was no filibuster, it's very possible that George W. Bush would have prioritized Social Security and we would have been in a mess. I do, however, think this idea of challenge flags, where you would be able to pick as a minority one issue that you're just going to like stop, but you're going to have to like make concessions on other issues, might be more amenable, and it also could lead to better bipartisanship. You could have more bipartisanship if people felt, okay, something I really feel strongly about, I'm going to fight on, but I'm going to concede these other things. It's possible that could work out.
Interesting. Interesting. And are Democrats generally less inclined to use a filibuster than Republicans?
Democrats have almost never used the filibuster.
Right.
The only time that Democrats have ever used the filibuster was with that Social Security privatization. That's the only serious effort on it that Democrats have ever mounted. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that Republicans really don't want to accomplish anything in terms of policy. There's very little policy that they want to accomplish. I mean, Harry Reid himself said that what Mitch McConnell did in the Senate was he basically just turned that into an agency that hired judges.
Right.
And that's basically all it was. That's all that McConnell cared about was hiring judges. Which that was number one, and then number two,
It worked for them. They
yeah.
put in 200 plus judges during Trump's 4 years.
And notice that's the one thing that McConnell got rid of was he got rid of the judicial filibuster,
Yeah.
because he didn't want Democrats to filibuster his judges. So he cared about the judges. Other Republicans care about tax cuts, which can be done through budget processes. You don't need to do tax cuts through any piece of
legislative action.
Yeah. So that's exactly what that is about. So the only time Democrats have ever used the filibuster has been, in recent memory, has been the Social Security privatization. But that has a lot to do with the differences between the two parties.
Yeah. So then is any sort of investigation into the events of January 6th completely dead, or can they do it through the House?
I don't think so. I think it's kind of completely dead. I mean, part of the issue is that the reason we want this commission is you want to get Kevin McCarthy under oath saying what he has told people privately and what has been reported that he told people privately, which is that Donald Trump on January 6th basically told Kevin McCarthy that the people who were taking over the Capitol were rioting cared more about the election than he did, that he was not going to call in the National Guard or soldiers to bring order, that he was going to direct which he did. He directed them to Mike Pence and told them to go after Mike Pence. Right. That Trump was really completely. I mean, you want to talk about dereliction of duty. I mean, it's dereliction of duty, treason, you name it. All of it would apply to Donald Trump's actions on this. So that is really what we want. That's a big thing we want out of the commission. You want to get Kevin McCarthy, and I don't know what McConnell was doing on January 6th. I'd be interested to know who he was talking to about things. But you want to get these conversations, these things that have been reported in the media, on record, under oath, and create like a real historical record on this.
Right.
So that's really, that's why McConnell doesn't want to do it. I mean, he knows he's guilty. He knows Kevin McCarthy's guilty. He knows Trump's guilty. So, of course, as they said on the beat, criminals don't approve of commissions investigating their criminal enterprises. I mean, it doesn't happen.
Right. You made a brilliant analogy to The Sopranos.
Yeah, saying let's have a commission investigate waste management in Newark. That's basically why this is the way it is.
Although you missed the Wire opportunity.
Yeah, I kind of couldn't think of one because
my favorite moment in The Wire, or one of them, is when they're at a financial seminar, and one of them's taking notes, and Stringer Bell turns to him and says, "Are you taking notes on the motherfucking criminal conspiracy?" and knocks the pad out of his hand.
That's right. That is absolutely right. I do. That's a deep cut for The Wire. I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the
that's
only thing about The Wire was that they basically had to battle for everybody there.
Right.
Was there any Wire character that ended well for? I don't think there was.
Yeah, on both sides, no one. I don't even remember if McNulty stayed a cop or if he had to retire. And
so I'm not a big fan of season 5 of The Wire, but I would say the one
I know you are.
That I do remember ended up well was that one kid who gets adopted by Bunny. If you remember, Bunny Colvin adopts a kid.
Right.
His father is a drug dealer that's in prison. So it ends well for him. I mean, that's about it.
Yeah, I needed to do a full Wire rewatch to see the adventures of McNulty and Superman Lester Freeman.
I don't know if we should. I don't know. I don't know if I'm playing. If we should. Do they still have that terrible HD version on HBO Max, or is it the normal SD version?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay, the SD version is fine. I think the HD version is really bad.
But you also, during your episode, made a very great, because you were followed by Sharon Stone.
Oh, good. That's something I long for.
And when asked off the cuff like what your favorite Sharon Stone property was, you named Sam Raimi's underrated masterpiece, The Quick and the Dead.
Yeah, and it's a movie that Raimi did between the Evil Dead movies. I think the previous movie he did to Quick and the Dead was Army of the Dead, I believe,
He did
or
that before Army of Darkness.
Army of Darkness. Sorry, not Army of the Dead. That's
Yeah,
a Zack Snyder movie that came out recently. Army of Darkness. So I think Army of Darkness, I believe, came out in 92, 93. And then Quick and the Dead came out in 95 or 96.
Interesting.
I think it was between the Evil Dead franchise and the Spider-Man franchise for him. So Raimi had done these great Evil Dead movies.
Right.
I'm a great admirer of those movies. And then you had Darkman, which he made because Batman was given to Tim Burton and not to him. So he wanted to Hollywood that he could make a superhero movie. It's not a bad movie at all. It's a pretty good movie, I think.
It's a cult classic for many.
Yeah, it is a classic with Liam Neeson. Yeah, absolutely.
What's interesting, and we're going to go off into cinema talk here, is that during that period of the 90s, there were two sort of schools of action thought. There was a Sam Raimi, very comic book like action.
Right.
And then there was the John Woo style, which Hollywood embraced and eventually turned into The Matrix and Mission Impossible and just ran with that style until Marvel came onto the scene and essentially re-embraced the Sam Raimi style of action.
Oh, that's interesting. I do remember Anthony Lane in the New Yorker talking about how much it was very clear that Sam Raimi was influenced in the Spider-Man movies by actual comic books, actual comic book panels. Roy Lichtenstein and pop art were clearly an influence on Raimi, and so that was really interesting. It would make sense that Marvel would have re-embraced the Raimi way of doing action. It's interesting that Raimi wasn't a part of Marvel, and he's only now a part of Marvel.
He proved essentially that the Marvel template works with his Spider-Man movies, but he hasn't been part of new Marvel. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think he's actually coming in for the Doctor Strange movie. I think that's actually re-entry into the Marvel world. But yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and I think that the 90s actually, 90s Sam Raimi. So Raimi did Evil Dead, he did Darkman, and then he did Quick and the Dead.
Yeah. As you mentioned, Leonardo DiCaprio and Russell Crowe, and also a great performance from Gene Hackman.
Yeah, and I do remember that Gene Hackman got a lot of bad press for that movie, and I do also remember that was a big reason why critics didn't much care for it, because Hackman was playing the character he played in Unforgiven. Critics were very stuck on the fact that Gene Hackman was just playing the exact same character he was playing from Unforgiven. Every review talked about it. They were really annoyed by it. I do wonder if Raimi had simply cast somebody else, if that movie would have been received better by critics, because people just constantly kept comparing.
It's ironic that Hackman would be raked over the coals for playing the same character twice, when in the first movie he played that character was with Clint Eastwood, who has played the same character 20 times.
Right, more than plus. He's been the man with no name, and Dirty Harry, you name it. And he's played that same character out in the Old West and in big cities. Right. Exactly. He's played that character. You're right. There is a double standard there. But I think it's because Eastwood is seen as such an icon who just kind of plays himself.
Right.
Right. That's one of the things that Schwarzenegger said that he most got from Eastwood is this idea that you can just have a career playing yourself.
Right. Schwarzenegger certainly ran with that.
Correct. Schwarzenegger certainly ran with the idea of being the person who only plays himself in movies. Eastwood definitely did that. But yeah, I remember really being impressed by the movie, and I remember being amazed that nobody cared about it. Like, it just kind of opened and closed. It's very feminist, and certainly in the way Stone plays a female gunslinger. It's certainly it's a very good feminist movie in that regard. I think that's held up very well by it. But yeah, and DiCaprio was in it, I believe, 3 years before he did Titanic.
Yeah, I think
You
so.
know?
Richard Harris. I mean, DiCaprio's star was already rising at that point, but he hadn't hit Titanic level stardom at that point.
Right. Well, Richard Harris also was another character from Unforgiven, who, yeah, it was another.
Wait, is Richard Harris in Quick and the Dead, or am I
No,
misremembering
I
him
think you're
from?
misremembering. I don't think Richard Harris is in Quick and the Dead. I think you're thinking of the English Bob character they played, I believe, in Unforgiven.
Right.
But yeah, but that's so. I think Unforgiven kind of cast a very long shadow on Quick and the Dead,
Right.
and I do think that people were kind of like, oh, she's just trying to do her version of Unforgiven, which is not the case. It's very different, and it's very good. And then after that, Raimi did A Simple Plan, which is a good movie, with Billy Bob Thornton, Bill Paxton, I believe, late Bill Paxton, and Bridget Fonda. And then, of course, he goes right into Spider-Man movies. So I think that's. Although I do think he did another movie. I think he did another movie between that, but The Gift.
He did something as a palate cleanser in
Yeah,
between the Spider-Man movies, I believe.
yeah, and A Simple Plan. But I do think that there was something he did there. And then after Spider-Man movies were all done, he did Drag Me to Hell, which I think is a terrific movie. I just first class horror film, very underrated as well. But I do remember, yeah, Quick and the Dead is not a movie anyone talks about.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like it always gets brought up in talk of old Western movies,
Yeah,
but
I think with Sharon Stone,
or modern Western movies. Yeah.
in Sharon Stone, it's basically you had Basic Instinct, which was her star-making film, and then you have Casino, which is clearly her greatest performance. And then you just kind of people talk about those two movies a lot, and
Right.
that's about it. I don't think that maybe what's interesting, people do talk about Total Recall quite a bit.
Well, because Total Recall was when she sort of broke out from. She says that in her Golden Globe acceptance speech, she had been just, you know, hardworking Hollywood actor trying to make a name for herself, and she really distinguished herself in Total Recall.
Yeah, and she was subject to one of the great Arnold one-liners where he shoots her dead and says, "Consider that a divorce," which I thought was, which I remember was one of the great Arnold one-liners of all time.
Yeah. So do you think Sharon Stone's actual best movie is Casino?
I think her
Or
best performances, but I think that's because that's a little bit unfair. That movie is a tremendous vehicle for any actress. It's 3 hours long, so she was allowed to do a lot with that role. I also think she benefited from the fact that that movie was not De Niro's best movie, and it's not Pesci's best movie. I mean, I think
well, those are high bar. That's a high bar for both those actors.
right. I think one of the big problems was I remember when Casino came out, Dateline NBC did a whole behind the scenes of the real Casino, the actual characters who played in the movie, and De Niro's character, the guy who he actually was playing, the guy looked like Woody Allen. And
Right.
you wonder if like it was completely miscast. I mean, to have a guy like De Niro. I mean, if you had like, well, not necessarily Woody Allen, but like say David Paymer or some guy who was kind of very, meek and weak, and you could understand why they would be pushed around by Joe Pesci so easily. That whole thing would have been much stronger.
Right. People sort of went into Casino with the preconception of Goodfellas and Mean Streets and Taxi Driver because of
Right.
the Scorsese De Niro connection.
Yeah, I remember it was tremendously hyped because this was the first Scorsese De Niro movie since Goodfellas. Goodfellas had, in the previous 5 years between Casino and Goodfellas, attained just legendary status. And then, of course, the previous movies before then, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, The King of Comedy, which has, I think, become a very important touchstone in American movies.
in that it provided a
Joker, yes.
Joker material to rip off.
But yeah, that's basically it. But I think we should probably sort of call it a day at that.
Yeah. I mean, so what can the Democrats do to avoid being Charlie Brown, going for that kick on the football that Lucy's holding again?
Well, I said this on the beat. I do have some confidence that Biden knows what he's doing on this because he did show on COVID how his job is to show respect. I mean, Axios did that study where they said voters don't want bipartisanship, but everyone in politics knows what they really want is respect. And I think that's also part of changing the tone from Trump. He's not me tweeting Republicans; he's meeting with them and talking to them. I think that changing the tone concept is very, very important.
Okay, so
So
you think he can stick with that template and have some success getting his agenda
yeah,
fulfilled?
I think that that's a good template to stick with. I do also think it's important that Democrats win Senate seats in some states that are not, say, West Virginia. There's states that are far bluer, Florida is a
Mhm.
good one. North Carolina is another one. Maine. I mean, there's other states that are in play and have been in play for Democrats, where we have to win those Senate seats. It would be much easier than to have more Democratic senators and not have a situation where one guy in West Virginia has just so much power.
Right, right. Yeah, and the irony of Manchin talking about playing politics.
Yeah, I mean, look, hopefully, if things go well for Democrats, we pick up the seat in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. We
Mhm.
don't lose any seats, and then we don't have to worry about Joe Manchin as much because we'll
Right.
go from 50 seats to 52. Uh,
Can can Democrats reintroduce the bipartisan commission issue closer to the midterms?
They can. I mean, well, I think part of the reason that McConnell did this is he was very concerned about how this would play in the midterms. But yeah, they can try to do it. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to happen closer to the midterms.
Mhm.
What's going to happen closer to the midterms is Donald Trump will be out, provided he's not in jail, but he will be out
Right.
campaigning for Democratic Republican candidates. And there's certainly no way Republicans will allow that thing to reemerge, or that
Yes.
discussion to reemerge under those circumstances.
Well, we will see what happens to the Florida blogger
You're right.
and
That's exactly right.
his assorted minions,
You're right.
as Ari likes to call them.
Yeah.
Very good appearance on the T or on the beat this week with
Right.
on a delayed Che Day. Um, thank you very much for anyone watching. For Chaitanya Kamandore, I'm Shai Porn Turgansidit. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Good night.